At a Marine sniper range, a 78-year-old veteran arrived with nothing but a homemade orange rifle and a letter from a general. The younger soldiers laughed at him until he hit every target faster and cleaner than anyone on that base ever had. The man they mocked turned out to be a legend who once saved half their fathers in war. That day, the entire range stood in silence and saluted. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? They laughed the moment he stepped out of the battered pickup truck, a faded Vietnam veteran cap tilted over one eye, sleeves rolled up over sunburned arms, and an orange bolt-action rifle slung over his shoulder like a joke someone forgot to end. And the moment he walked across the hot tarmac toward the range, young Marines leaned out from the overhang whispering. Pointing, one even snorted, "Is that a Nerf gun?" Loud enough for others to break into full laughter. But the old man didn't flinch, didn't speak, just kept walking like the heat didn't matter, like time didn't exist, until he reached the shooting bench, unslung the gun, and began checking the bolt with hands that shook ever so slightly. Though no one noticed how his eyes scanned wind patterns and distance with quiet calculation honed in jungles, none of them would ever know. And when the base's top instructor, Staff Sergeant Blake, stepped forward, puffed up with years of training and swagger, he barked, "Sir, this isn't a flea market. What are you doing here?" But the old man simply pulled out a worn envelope, handed it over without a word, and waited while the sergeant read the stamped letter from General Addison himself, a direct order authorizing Mac Callahan, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant, to demonstrate on Range 14, and in an instant the jokes died, replaced by the kind of uncomfortable silence that only happens when boys realize they're standing in front of someone who's bled for reasons they'll never fully understand. But the silence didn't last, not when they saw the orange rifle up close. Odd shape, bright paint, no name brand they recognized, and someone in the back whispered, "That's gotta be custom." But Callahan didn't explain, didn't brag, just settled behind the rifle, adjusted the scope with veined hands, and muttered, "Winds light at 700, drag patterns off at 1100, heat shimmer's gonna bend this shot," then loaded a single round and waited as the instructor chuckled and said, "That's a 1,000-yard plate. You sure you're up for this, Gramps?" But Mac didn't respond, just pressed his cheek against the stock, took one long breath and squeezed, and the moment cracked with the sharp pop of suppressed power, the recoil barely shifting the rifle, and half a second later, the far steel target rang so cleanly that even the instructors jolted, staring downrange where the plate still trembled, and Mac rolled his shoulder and said, "Call the next one," calm as if he'd just taken a sip of coffee. Not pulled off a shot. Most of them couldn't dream of hitting on their best day. And when they brought out the moving target, side wind at 20 knots, distance at 850, Mac asked for no adjustments, no spotters, just loaded again and hit it mid-stride with such precision that even Blake muttered, "No way," under his breath, and then came the custom tests. Dual pop-ups at staggered ranges, angled fire through brush simulation, and a final coin-sized plate at 1,200 yards. And by the time Mac hit every single one without a miss, standing, kneeling, prone, eyes steady, breathing even, back straight despite the decades, the laughter was gone, replaced by a stunned hush, and then whispers started again. Not mocking this time, but awe, real awe. And one Marine stepped forward and asked, "Sir, what kind of rifle is that?" And Mac finally looked up, one corner of his mouth twitching, and said, "It's one I built myself in '74, tuned every part by hand, because the jungles don't care if your gear is pretty, only if it saves lives." And when another asked, "Were you a sniper?" he answered, "Once." And Blake, trying to save face, muttered, "You still use Vietnam tricks?" And Mac finally stood, turned slowly, eyes like cold rivers, and said, "Son, the tricks kept your father alive in Mosul. His name was Corporal Darren Blake. I dragged him out under fire." And silence fell so deep you could hear dust shift in the wind. Because now it wasn't just a demonstration, it was a reckoning. A reminder that the ground they stood on had been bought by men like him with blood, sweat, and silence. And as word spread around the base, Marines started coming out. Recon snipers, instructors, even senior officers, drawn not by rank but by reputation, because the name Red Callahan had lived like a ghost in sniper lore, whispered in ranges from Fallujah to Kandahar, as the man who made the longest confirmed shot in Southeast Asia with iron sights. And here he was, wearing Walmart boots and a sun-faded cap, dismantling every test they threw at him without breaking a sweat. And when a cocky new recon candidate finally stepped up, smirking, and said, "Bet I could beat you on the speed run," Mac paused, nodded, and said, "All right, but you fire first." And they lined up for the double-speed pop-up challenge. 10 targets, random sequence, sub-4-second reaction, and the Marine moved fast. Clean hits in 9.2 seconds. Tight form, smooth transition, and then Mac stepped up, adjusted his rifle, and with a deep breath began, firing so fast and so clean that by the time he hit the last target, the timer read 7.8. And the young Marine just stared, slack-jawed, before stepping back and saluting without a word. And Mac returned the gesture, then turned to leave. But before he could reach his truck, General Addison himself stepped out from a black SUV that had just rolled in, clapping slow and loud, followed by a few aides who were filming everything. And the general approached, shook Mac's hand, and said, "I needed them to remember what made this Corps great." Then louder, to the men, added, "You just watched a man who once held a perimeter alone for 36 hours in Laos with 3 bullets and a broken ankle, and didn't call for extraction until every man in his team was out." And Mac, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, just muttered, "I didn't do it for a story." But the general smiled and said, "No, but they need the story now more than ever." And with that, the entire range stood at attention, and every Marine, some of whom had laughed earlier, now watched as the old man slung the orange rifle, nodded once to the general, and walked off into the dust, a living reminder that skill, heart, and honor don't come with youth. And the rifle everyone mocked was now the subject of whispered reverence, with one corporal quietly saying, "I want to train like him," and another whispering, "That wasn't a rifle, that was a legacy." And back in the truck, Mac paused, looked at a photo taped to the dashboard, 3 brothers in arms, long gone, smiling in the jungle, and whispered, "That was for you, boys," before driving off as the sun dipped behind the range, leaving behind silence, respect, and a legend reborn.